Good morning, Chairman.
Good morning. I would like to welcome everyone present in the chamber and those listening online to the business of the Highways and Transport Scrutiny Committee meeting. My name is Councillor Alex Hall and I'm the chairman of this committee. Can I remind you that the audio-visual feed of this formal public meeting is being broadcasted live via the County Council's website and all your comments will remain accessible online. There is no fire drill planned this morning. In the event of a fire alarm sounding, we need to leave the council chamber through the rear doors and leave the building through the reception and assemble in the front car park and await further instructions. Can I request everyone present to ensure your mobiles, laptops and iPads are on silent for the duration of this meeting? May I remind you that the hearing loop is now activated. In the absence of Vice Chairman Councillor Richard Wright, I would like to nominate Councillor Vernon as Vice Chairman for this meeting only. And we'll just have a vote on that for those in favour. And those, so, all those in favour. Thank you. Those against? No. Any abstentions? No. Thank you. That is now carried. Councillor Vernon, please, can you join us on the top table, please? Thank you. Requests to speak will be collated by Councillor Vernon. I will try to ensure that everyone has the opportunity to ask questions and make contributions. I would appreciate contributions to be succinct and concise and ask that you indicate early when you wish to speak. We will now move on to the formal agenda. So item 1, apologies for absence. Andrew.
We have apologies from Councillor Stokes, who's today being replaced by Councillor Tom Smith. And we also have apologies, as you mentioned, from Vice Chairman Councillor Richard Wright, who's being replaced today by Councillor Jack Terrell. Thank you.
Thank you. Item 2, declarations of members' interest. Do any members have any declarations to declare? Seeing none. Okay, so item 3. This item is to approve and sign minutes of the last meeting as a record. Please turn to pages 5 to 10 of your agenda pack. Do I have a proposer? Councillor Strangle. And a seconder? Councillor Gibson, thank you. Those in favour? Thank you. Those against? Any abstentions? Okay, thank you, Councillor Smith. Thank you. The minutes are agreed as a correct record. Item 4 of the agenda, announcements by the Chairman, Executive Councillors and Lead Officers. As my report, I would like to just say that at the Environment and Economy Scrutiny Committee on the 10th of September 2024, members discussed the urgent need for the North Highcombe Relief Road amidst uncertainty over government funding. The committee was joined by Dr Johnson MP, who expressed her ongoing commitment to securing the necessary funds, emphasising the road's importance for reducing congestion and stimulating economic growth. The portfolio holder for Highways, Transport and IT, Councillor Richard Davis, raised concerns about the unequal distribution of infrastructure investment, noting Lincolnshire's historical neglect, while Councillor Tom Dyer, representing the Environment and Economic Development portfolio, highlighted the economic and housing opportunities the road would unlock, warning against short-sighted cuts. Sam Edwards provided updates on the project's progress, including planning, milestones and expenditure, while members raised concerns about future housing developments, the potential impact of delays and the long-term consequences of not proceeding. I am pleased to report that members strongly supported the scheme, citing the critical role it plays in Lincolnshire's infrastructure strategy and economic future, and urged prompt government action to avoid inflated costs and missed opportunities. Following the meeting, we were made aware that Mr Hamish Faulkner MP, who pledged his full support towards ensuring the future of the project, which was welcomed. It is now in the hands of our leading officers to put together yet another strong case, supported by our local MPs and executive portfolio holders, to request that the North Highcombe Relief Road will soon be realised. Moving on, as members already be aware, the topic of local authority powers in relation to bus services under legislation is being laid before Parliament today. This marks a significant wave of change that is bound to affect our routes, network and service delivery. I look forward to an update from our leading officers in the next meeting about what the future may look like. Turning to our agenda today, we have one pre-decision item to consider alongside a busy agenda today. Therefore, I should like to stress the importance of taking reports as read and ask for our presenters summarise the key points and type of input expected by the committee. Introductions of reports will be capped at 5 minutes to facilitate consideration and debate. Moving on to Executive Council announcements. Do we have any announcements by Councillor Richard Davis or Councillor Cleo Powson-Williams?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. No announcements from me.
Okay.
No announcements from me either. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Senior officers, do you have any comments that any senior officers would like to raise?
Good morning, Chairman. No officers.
Thank you.
No officer announcements today.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to the next item of the agenda, the Highways Infrastructure Asset Management Plan 2024. This pre-decision scrutiny report can be found on pages 11 to 170 of the agenda pack. The report sets out the proposed amendments to the Highways Infrastructure Asset Management Plan for 2024. Adopting the plan will help service maximise government grant funding for highways maintenance and ensure effective asset management. It will also guide officers, consultants and contractors, support decision making for elected members and inform the public about challenges and actions in managing the highway asset. In terms of our actions as a committee, it is asked that we consider the report and determine whether we support recommendations to the Executive Councillor and that we agree any additional comments to be passed on to the Executive Council in relation to this item. The report will be presented by Carl and the Strategic Asset Manager for Highway Services, who is, Jonathan is here in attendance to if there's any questions that he would like to take. So over to you, Carl. Thank you.
Thank you. The Highways Infrastructure Asset Management Plan outlines the Council's approach to maintaining our highways assets through a variety of methods. The document is structured in key 4 asset groups: highways, drainage, structures and street lighting. Firstly, it shows our approach to accurate recording of all our assets through our asset management system. Secondly, the document highlights our approach to maintaining the condition of all our individual assets in extensive detail. Thirdly, it demonstrates our method of inspections for all our assets. And finally, the document outlines the various ways we programme our maintenance regime, from reactive to planned works and future programmes. We review our HIAMP on an annual basis, and there has been a full review of update of the 2023 document, with changes throughout to include amendments to dates, hyperlinks, policy titles and network length. A list of all the amendments can be found in Appendix B, page 154 of your report pack. Which leads me to our biggest change for 2024, and that is the introduction of new arboricultural volume. The volume, we have worked closely with our arborists and our local highways teams to ensure that this volume accurately reflects what is happening on the ground. Some of the text contained within this volume is a direct transfer from what was contained within the highways volume for previous iterations. However, we have expanded the content significantly. From an officer's perspective, up until now, we haven't had a clear written policy of what we can and cannot do with enforcement. This could make it difficult to get members of the public or local businesses to commit to any works that we're asking them to carry out to ensure the highway is safe as reasonably practical. I therefore think you'll see a significant benefit to have a written policy to back up their decision making. Also, from your member perspective, it helps to have a written policy in place when speaking to your constituents about problems or nuisance trees. We have also included information of our tree management styles, and looking ahead, we look forward to further add to this information on our LCC webpage, where we can include graphics to show the different management styles and some before and after photos. So that's just a brief update on our new Volume 6. Other changes are as follows. Volume 1 has had some minor changes to align our highways infrastructure asset management strategy and our data management strategy. Volume 2 now includes inspection frequencies for our laybys and also information on competence and training of our inspection officers. There are no proposed amendments to Volume 3 and Volume 4, drainage and structures respectively. Volume 5, the routine maintenance and cleaning cycle now shows that the current cycle of works was completed in March 2024 and shall resume in April 2026. In addition, we currently have a policy that has a 5-day response time for faults raised by the Night Scout and a 10-day response time for faults raised by the public. For this year's iteration, the Night Scout response times have been amended to 10 days, which will align with the response times defects reported by members of the public for the same fault. Volume 6, as I was described as earlier. Appendix B has 2 defect types, and these are for our edge damage, which is less than or equal to 40 millimetres. Our previous iteration included damage over 40 millimetres, but not less than, so this is now included. Notes have been added to state that defects in laybys may be de-escalated due to reduced risk. Another disclaimer has been added to show that for junctions that serve more than one hierarchy of road, the highest hierarchy response time should be used, and that also applies to response times on things such as vegetation cutbacks. That concludes the updates for the High AMP. Our recommendations are that the Executive Council approves the Highways Infrastructure Asset Management Plan for 2024. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just very briefly to say that I genuinely welcome a very clear and ambiguous set of policies that are outlined in the document before us. It has clearly been gone through in a great deal of detail to provide that clarity. For my own part, I welcome the inclusion of the laybys into this scheme. I've got a couple in Tumby and Tumby Woodside, which could certainly do with the attention. So on that personal level, I'm delighted to see that we're picking that up. I'm just very happy to move it, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chairman. As Councillor Ashton has said, it's a very thorough report. The thing I'm very, very happy is in there is Volume 6, because for those that don't know, Keelby has some lovely trees, but they do cause quite a lot of headache. And this is very helpful because at the moment it's very much been, we'll get there when we get there, but nothing's sort of been codified or written down. So this is hugely helpful because I can go to my councils and the members of the public and say, that's what the policy is, that's what we intend to do. And it's great that we're looking to regularise our tree maintenance, because I know that's been a big complaint in my part of the world, and I'm more than happy to second the paper, Chairman.
Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chair. On Volume 6, can I just have some clarification? If a tree is on the highways and it approaches a private owner's land, you know, i.e. the garden, it overhangs the garden, it's hitting the roof, whose responsibility is it to cut that tree back?
Happy to take that one, Councillor Clark. In terms of the Highway Authority, if it's an asset that is ours, in that we can do a condition survey, that would be ours to deal with. What we're trying to balance here, though, is a risk to, you know, we are an asset, a large asset owner across the county, and the way that we disaggregate and allocate our spend just needs to be given consideration. So when we're doing our condition surveys, we're interacting with those that are most at need or are likely to cause harm, and we're doing it on sort of a risk-based approach. So we're doing, at the moment, a 6 or 7 year cycle of all of our tree assets, And the idea of this featuring more in the Highways Infrastructure Asset Management Plan is that we want to shift our approach to trees more from a reactive to a planned. So we want to do this sort of tree and avenue lined management. So places like Lincoln, for example, where we've got sort of growth, we're not going in there just reacting to a problem, we're trying to get in there preventatively. I think some of the pressure that we'll discuss today is there isn't any more budget allocated for this asset, so what we're trying to do over time is just gradually shift to doing pollarding, looking at basal growth and trying to counteract those before we get an issue to residents nearby.
Thank you. Councillor Brooks.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I agree with other comments that it is a good report and the HIAMP is an easy to read document. So thank you for that. In relation to the new section on arboriculture, if I can get my tongue around that, the maintenance of hedges, 5 to 15 on the report pack's page 114, and it's page 95 of the HIAM. It's talking about on 5 to 15. The maintenance of hedges ensures that visibility sight lines, road signs are not obscured, and talking about leaving the way clear so that you can see signs, clearing hedges so that you can see signs, etc. But driving around the county, there's so many signs hidden in hedges. I'm just wondering how often this is done and how well it's done, because there's just, you say report them on Fix My Street, but there's just too many of them to be going around reporting all of those. And I'm just wondering how much attention is paid to clearing the way so that signs can be easily seen and read. That was one question I'd got. And the other question was on the street lighting section, which is a little bit earlier. It's page 108 of the report pack, page 89. It's the street light cleaning cycles and illuminated traffic signs, etc. The present cycle finished in, the last cycle finished in March 24, and the next cycle starts in April 26. So there's sort of a gap year. But driving around county again, there's lots of bollards and things that are absolutely black. And does that mean they've got to wait another year before we start the cleaning cycle again? It just, those are a couple of questions that I pose. Because if we've got the HIAMP, we need to stick to it. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you, Chairman. I will endeavour to answer those questions. I might defer to Jonathan on the street lighting one if I miss anything. Just to go, if I may, back to Councillor Clark's point as well about highways trees that are overhanging, fully agree with Jonathan about that the decisions that have to be made about what maintenance we will carry out. But I just thought it was important to also note that whilst it's not within the Highways Act, private residents do have the right to trim branches that are overhanging their property, whether they're from a neighbour or from the highway, as long as it's not covered by a tree protection order. Moving on to the hedges where signs are obscured. Obviously we do encourage people to report those, but I agree, I saw one this morning on my way in as well that was overgrown by a private hedge. The local highways teams will write to landowners asking them to carry out maintenance of hedges. Bird nesting season over the summer can be problematic because people aren't meant to be trimming hedges whilst there could be birds nesting in them, but by the end of August we'd expect private hedge owners to be cutting that back. One thing that the local teams have started using now is we've mentioned it in previous committees, but we have a system called Visala Road AI, which is predominantly for assessing the condition of roads, but it also picks up through artificial intelligence signs. And one thing that it does that's quite clever is it will say it sees a sign on one pass, and then the next time it can't see it because it's obscured, so it actually gives you a map of where signs are becoming not visible, which is helping us quite a lot in targeting that, either enforcement or if it is a highways hedge, our own works to do that. So we're trying to take advantage of all of the information we can get to be more on top of things on a county-wide basis. And then just moving on to the street lighting cycle, which Jonathan will correct me if I'm wrong, but that cycle is a 2-year cycle of inspection. So we're not missing a year. It's not an annual. It takes longer than 1 year to do the full cycle of inspection of all of those assets. So just wanted to clarify that there's not sort of a year off in there where things aren't being picked up, but I might be, having not authored the report, I might have misunderstood that.
Could I just come back on that? It does say that the current cycle is completed in March 24 and the next cycle starts in April 26. So there's a year's gap there. That's why I asked the question. Yeah.
Yeah, happy to take that, Councillor Brooks. I think there's probably some additional text that needs to go into here to make that clear. And as Richard outlined, we have a continuous cycle of street lighting cleansing programme, and the illuminated bollards are done on a 12-monthly cycle. None of that activity has changed as a result of this document going out, so we'll make that clearer at 5.5.1. That isn't the case, because it does read as though, or it can be read, that there's a gap in service when there isn't. So we'll take that away and make sure that's adjusted in the final document.
Thank you. Yeah, okay.
If I could just come back, sorry to be a nuisance, Chairman, but on the maintenance of hedges and that, we used to have gangs that went round the county. They went into each division, and you could have a list of things for them to do, and a lot of those was cutting back on signs, and the local member would know, and parishes would know about that, and we used to put them on the list, and they used to get done, but that's sort of doesn't seem to happen anymore. Thank you.
Richard.
Yes, thank you for that, Councillor Brooks. We don't have the same setup as that anymore. Having been a highways officer, but at the time we did have those generic gangs. I remember issuing those lists on bits of paper, but the gangs that we do now have the ability to do small areas of cutting back around signs, and can just be issued as ones off. So we would still encourage members, if there's anything in particular that they've seen that they think we might not have done, to report that, and in the same way you would have given us a list, we can get that issued to the gangs, because that's how the local officers would be issuing them themselves anyway. It's just not quite the same generic setup as it used to be, and we don't have specific gangs going around doing vegetation work. Although, as Jonathan has said, we are trying to be much more planned about what we do and issue bigger packages of work along areas where we know that there are problems. Many of the signs that are obscured do tend to be obscured by hedges that are private responsibility, though. So it's a slightly different process of making contact with landowners, writing them letters, and eventually making a decision about whether we do that work and try and recharge it, or whether we serve notice on people and potentially take them to court.
Councillor Warlands.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one comment on the hedges issue. I'm sure officers are aware that agricultural hedge cutters can't be strategic enough to negotiate the way around a small road sign. It's impossible without you take the road sign with the cutter. So you try the cutting machines and the operators try to avoid them from damaging from the sign's point of view, but probably more importantly the equipment. And also a lot of these signs are actually on the highway's verge, but they've got themselves embedded in the hedge over a number of years because no one can actually get behind them to cut it. So I wondered if there was any possibility of inducements to or some communication, say, with the local landowners or anything in particular areas where they could be asked to go and do that as a matter of additional hedge cutting. But I said their equipment just won't do that. It's just not practical. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, Councillor Rawlings, there that you make around the sort of encroachment and the sort of the growth of hedges over time. Something that the Highway Services is currently doing is flail cutting our verge maintenance to about 1.1 metre. So over time there is this concern of, from a highways perspective of an officer, that there is this sort of gradual encroachment. Obviously we do allocate budget for our hedges that are LCC owned, and we will flail and push them back. But something we can take away, myself and Richard, is working with the local teams to push that enforcement with nearby landowners and make sure we sort of try and push that encroachment back. But at this moment in time, our service is sort of mainly focused on that grass cutting up to 1.1 metres. So there is a risk that over time that you do build that, have encroachment onto the highway.
Thank you. Councillor Vernon.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Richard, for explaining about the use of AI, because that was one of the questions that I had as to how that worked, and it certainly sounds a really interesting and quite modern way of dealing with it, rather than having to go out and look at these things individually. The other questions and points that I just wanted to raise were on page 37. I was really interested to read that the carriageway hierarchy is not determined by road classification but by functionality and scale of use. And I think that's really important for us rurally, because sort of, as we all know, sort of an A and B road may not be sort of as well used as a more well-known local route. So I thought that was really interesting. And then on page 64, the routine local highway inspections don't cover structures and safety barriers, which I was quite surprised by, and I just wondered if I could ask why that was. Thank you.
Yeah, happy to take those points. In terms of the road hierarchy, we as you say, we break them down into a higher level. We define them within the document, and it allows us to have greater insight into those areas of the assets. So when we allocate spend to each of those asset groups, we can understand in more detail what's happening. So if we spend X million, we see this condition improvement, and that's something I'll be reporting on an annual basis in June, like I did earlier in the year. In relation to the other point you made, in terms of safety inspection, that's largely to do with the skills of the inspector. So for structures largely underground, we have a structures team that are based in a separate team to the ones that are doing those day in, day out safety inspections on the network. Obviously, if any member of Richard's team identify a clear and obvious issue, a safety concern, they'll be raising it and logging it, but we go out on a cycle with a special inspection for structures of those type. And that's just due to risk and skill type.
Thank you. Councillor Strangle.
Thank you, Chairman. I did have my hand up almost first, but maybe I should stand because I'm vertically challenged to put my hand up. I'd like to concur with my colleagues to say that this is an excellent report. One of the questions I was going to ask has been answered, so the one thing that I need to know is the relationship now, and I see Warren's here, which is good, between the City Council as a developer on the Western Growth Corridor and highways, because there seems to be nothing coming out at all. I can see that obviously it's my patch, Birchwood, where the development is situated, and I can see a lot of highways infrastructure going on Tritton Road, but we don't seem to be fed anything, or I don't seem to be fed. I can't speak for my colleagues. Obviously, Councillor Clark is one of those perhaps affected. I just seem to, it's all gone quiet, and I would like to know if there's still a good relationship there between Cork and ourselves. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Do we have any other speakers? Oh, Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, firstly, I agree completely what the last speaker just said. On the policy about tree cutting, where, you know, it says residents can cut their own trees. Not many residents in my area have a cherry picker in the back garden. The trees haven't been managed at all. And, you know, to say on a report you can cut their branches, but in reality, the residents can't because the trees are just too high. Two quick questions. On volume 2, footway inspectors, It says you can do an inspection by a car or by foot. If it's done by car, is that reported? And also, is there a difference between a cycleway and a shared path?
Thank you, Chairman. To come back on both of those points, I would just like to make it clear, Councillor Clark, I'm not in any way wanting to suggest that we expect that members of the public should be doing maintenance work on highways, trees. I think the point I was trying to get across is sometimes the standards of maintenance that we would set out as to where we would intervene with a tree that our arborists would look at and say, there's nothing wrong with that tree. It might be a bit full, but it's not diseased. It's not causing any issues. There's no safety issues. And for us, there's no particular need to intervene at that point. Might not align with what a member of the public would view as thinking they think it's a bit full. And I was just explaining that they do have a right themselves, that anything that is even a centimetre over their boundary, they can trim themselves. So I wouldn't be expecting them to get cherry pickers and do large scale maintenance. It was just to make a point that that is a legal right that people have. And moving on to the second point about inspections, yes, we record whether a footway is walked or not in two ways. Either there's a defined walked inspection which has to be done on foot, or some of the driven inspections do combine footways at the same time, but our officers make a note if they have physically walked that footway on there. So it is recorded in our system and we can access all of that data, which is quite important for our colleagues in insurance and legal anyway, so we capture that. And then in terms of footways, shared use footways and cycleways, the only difference is that a shared use is inspected as a footway, whereas a cycleway is inspected as part of the carriageway.
Thank you. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chairman, for your indulgence. It's a very brief question. I note, Jonathan, around what you said about there's not an increase in budget, and you mentioned new problems. Richard will be aware of the problem I'm thinking of in Keelby that is long-standing to do with basal growth. What's being done for sort of existing problems that have been long-term, ongoing issues so that they can be resolved as quick as we can do, obviously appreciating the budgetary constraints. Thank you, Chairman, for your indulgence.
Yeah, in terms of known issues, we're obviously prioritising them on a risk-based approach, and we're trying to make sure we've got the resource on the Balfour Beatty side of the contract. We work with a number of supply chain partners, and making sure that they've got resource in the county is key to us, and the resource that we've got is as productive as possible. So those tasks that we're aware of, we're working on. Just for the committee's knowledge in terms of the spend for this service area, it's probably 600 to 700,000 per annum that we're spending on tree maintenance. And as I've sort of outlined within the report and our commentary today, what we're trying to do is gradually shift our approach from a reactive response to more preventative. So it will take some time, but those faults that you've mentioned there about basal growth will hopefully pick up on a more efficient process, because we'll be doing avenue management where we've got traffic management out. We can go out there at a quicker pace and get more work done. What we've probably done over time is gone out ad hoc, and we've spent too much time travelling, I think. So it's a shift. I'm glad it's now in the strategy and our high amp, and we're going to move forward over the next couple of years. But I suspect it's not going to be a fix-all, and public aren't going to see things that quickly, but it will happen, and I think it's the right decision to make.
Thank you. Councillor Borlands.
Thank you once again, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of points. On the main body of the report, we refer on page 8 to the bus service improvement plan, which was approved in June of this year. Looking to sort of likely changes on the horizon, have we had any communication with central government regarding the supposed new approach to public transport and what that might mean to us? And also, just on the footpath issue, do we have within our plan some facility to actually cut back some of the overgrowth on footpaths, which in one or two of my villages in my division have got very excessive, and the footpath is down to a foot perhaps when it should be about 3 feet wide. And I think I do understand we do have equipment to be able to do that, so I just wonder what the strategy on that one was. Thank you.
Sorry. Thanks, Chairman. Just response regarding the bus service improvement plan. We're still waiting for government clarification on what the direction of travel will be. So obviously there's lots of priorities for the new government. Once we hear something, then that will be obviously delivering and driving a lot of what we do in transport. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Gibson.
Try that one, Chairman. I was just looking at the response times. Interesting to see that quite a lot of the hierarchy, 1, 2, 3, is 7 days for a lot of the work. How do we know what road is what hierarchy so we can check when this is reported to see if that's happening, please?
Yeah, thank you. If I may just come back to Councillor Rawlins, there's a question about the siding, so I think I missed my chance to get in there because we were falling over each other there. But we do have the ability to do hand siding back of vegetation on footways for short lengths, which the local highways teams can arrange. If it's longer lengths, which they tend to be quite long stretches where the vegetation's kind of encroached, where over the years it's maybe not been walked as much, and we are noticing that people are using those rural footways again a bit more since the pandemic. There is machinery that can do that. There's a limit to how much of we can do, but if you speak to the local highways manager or report on Fix My Street, then what we do is we put briefs together for a package of those each year to do mechanical siding of footways. The only real limitation on that is if the footway underneath is really, really starting to crumble, the mechanical siding can make it worse. So we'll initially do an inspection to see whether it can be sided back, as we'd call it, or if it does just need full reconstruction, which might take a little bit longer. In response to Councillor Gibson's question about the hierarchies, our asset management, fortunately, because it would be a lot to remember for local officers, our asset management system has a mobile interface. So when they go out to look at a public report or they do their inspection, it's all on a mobile version of Confirm, which is our highways asset management system, and they issue the works that are related to those inspections or public enquiries through the same system. And when you issue a defect to create a job for Balfour Beatty to carry out, it tells you what hierarchy of road you are on. Not only does it do that, but it's configured to say, and because it's this hierarchy and it's this type of defect, the response time is 7 days or 24 hours, depending on the combination of the type of defect that you're issuing and the place where it is. So as well as it showing on the map what it is, the system actually does it by default for the officers, so they don't have to try and remember what type of road they're on and what the response time should be according to the policy. The policy is actually mapped against our asset management system. Does that make sense?
Thank you. Yeah, that's okay. Councillor Gibson.
It does. I was just wondering how we would know. So if a member of the public says to us, I've raised this complaint, it's been a month, how do we know, looking at the policy, whether we're within policy or not?
That is a good question, because, I mean, please ask, of course, any of the local highways teams will be able to tell you, but sort of a snap of the finger, it's not always that obvious. As Councillor Vernon had pointed out, sometimes it's there are particular roads where we've either escalated or de-escalated the hierarchy, but because of certain circumstances that are out there that mean it's not just based on the road class. So, for example, you can get some unclassified roads that are our highest hierarchy. Likewise, you can get bits of a road that aren't necessarily, because they might be in a it doesn't happen that often, but there are some that the other way around. We are working longer term to try and, through Fix My Street, give the time scale to a repair, which would be an easy way to say, well, if it's a 28-day, it's obviously that one of those hierarchies. And that's something that we're working with My Society to get in place to give those ideas. But in the short term, I would suggest that members just contact the local highways manager if they are curious about how long it should take. Broadly speaking, A roads tend to be either a 24-hour or a 6. Well, they are going to be a 24-hour. B and C's are generally either 7 days or 28 days, and then the rest of them are going to be around 28 days, except you really back lanes, which might be the longest response time.
Thank you. Last question to Councillor Strangle.
It isn't a question, it's just I never had an answer to my previous question. Warren was ready to give the answer, but obviously it must be because I'm north of the border and you don't understand my accent.
No,
but I assure you I speak the King's English.
Debatable. Okay, thank you. Warren, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. What I'll do is I'll provide both Councillor Strangle and Clark with a detailed update on the Western Growth Corridor project by the end of the week. But I think the question was, how is the relationship with the city? The relationship remains positive. There have been some challenges regarding the Tritton Road junction, and I think as we can all appreciate the complexity of that project, with it having a bridge structure, it's going over a railway line, etc., has had its challenges. But I do believe the chief execs and the leaders of both authorities met last week or the week before to agree a way forward, which was a positive discussion. So as far as we're concerned as officers, that the project is progressing, technical approval is imminent for the Tritton Road. So again, I think you're probably starting to see some activity on that side of the project as well. But I will go away, speak to the project team and provide you a full update by the end of the week.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for questions and comments. This now concludes the discussion of this item. I move that the committee supports the proposed recommendations as set out on page 13 of the report, with the caveat of changes agreed in relation to section 5. I ask that comments raised by this committee be shared with the Executive Councillor for his consideration ahead of the decision being made between the 23rd and 30th of September 2024. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Vernon. Those in favour? Those against? None. And any abstentions? None. Thank you. So moving on to the next item, Streets Design Code. This scrutiny report can be found on pages 171 to 174 of the agenda pack. This report outlines the proposed development of a streets design code aimed at consolidating and updating Lincolnshire County Council's existing design guidelines for highways, flood risk and drainage by combining the design approach and development roads specification documents. The new code will streamline requirements for developers, ensuring safer, sustainable and well-integrated developments. This initiative aligns with the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government's push for local design codes, enhancing the quality of new developments across Lincolnshire. In terms of our actions as a committee, it is asked that we support the production of a streets design code and agrees any topics to review or include within the streets design code. I should make members aware that the report was already considered at the Environment and Economy Scrutiny Committee last week. To ensure no duplication of efforts, I would like to summarise the debate they had about it. Discussion mainly revolved around balancing local nuances with the standardised must, should and could framework, with assurances given that flexibility would be maintained to address local authority differences. Secondly, the importance of ensuring developers listen to local knowledge, especially regarding issues like parking and flood risk, was emphasised. Furthermore, concerns were also raised about the long-term maintenance of street furniture and infrastructure, with the suggestion that adoption by local authorities and commuted sums from developers could help ensure proper upkeep. Finally, discussion highlighted the challenges of enforcing mandatory requirements, with members of the committee agreeing that clearer enforceable standards tied to local character would help avoid poor development. I will now turn to Becky Phillips-Moolish, the Growth Manager, and the Development Management, who will present this report. Warren Peppard, Head of Development Management, for a brief introduction and then move on to the debate. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman, for the introduction and for the overview of the discussion at E&E last week. I think I just wanted to briefly touch on the kind of anticipated outcomes that we want to see off the back of this project. We want to see developments coming forward in Lincolnshire that are high quality, that integrate really well with existing communities, that are reflective of the community expectations of those developments as well, not just a national product, you know, cookie cutter house builder type development that we can often see coming forward. And that also reflect recent changes to the planning system, so in terms of biodiversity net gain, flood risk mitigation, sustainable drainage systems, things like that. As the Chairman outlined, we have two existing guidance documents that developers use. We've got one called the Design Approach, which is used at the design planning stage, and one called the Development Road Specification, which is the detailed design of how they actually build the roads on site, and that comes post-planning permission. And what we want to do is create this new document, Consolidate, as was described, which provides that end-to-end system that a developer can use that actually follows along their project timeline. So it's supposed to be more kind of user-friendly for developers. We're also going to use it as an opportunity to strengthen some of our guidance, so on things like flood risk and drainage, for example, because I know that's obviously something that's a regular concern. What we really want to do with this is to encourage innovation, good development. So it's not about setting, you know, really clear standards that prohibit those developers that want to do really good things, but it is about bringing up from the bottom. So that bad development is how we prevent those bad developments that we sometimes see coming forward. The must, shoulds and coulds that we referred to. So the must is mandatory requirements that developers will have to comply with. Shoulds are requirements that would require justification if developers wanted to deviate from them, and coulds are that real art of the possible recommendations for what we would like to see in Lincolnshire in terms of street design. I just wanted to stress that it's not going to replace face-to-face engagement with developers. We still continue to have very good relationships with developers. It's just that assistance tool that gives us a really clear framework that we can refer back to shape those best development proposals. Obviously, we also recognise as well that this isn't just a document that is place-based. It has ramifications across the entirety of the organisation. So we'll be working really closely across service areas and disciplines to make sure that it aligns with all of our One Council objectives and aims. This is going to provide a really clear framework for what we expect developers to deliver in Lincolnshire, and we can use it to influence that really good design. But we need to recognise that within the planning system, we are not the ultimate decision makers. Our remit here is as Highway and Lead Local Flood Authority. So for it to hold actual significant weight in the planning system, it needs to be adopted by the local planning authorities, and that was part of the discussion that we had at E&E, is about how we facilitate that both politically and at officer level. So that isn't necessarily a point for discussion today, but it's just to make it clear where we kind of sit in that planning process and what our remit is. And with that, I'll hand over for any comments or questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Tyrrell.
Thank you, Chair. Now, I haven't quite read the report because I've only just come on here. But the question I'm going to ask is, all developers can do an adoptable road, but they don't have to carry it out and have it adopted, do they? So the hard part for me is, because I sit on planning at South Holland, and we go through all this, and we make them do all this and everything else, and then all of a sudden they don't have to do it. Isn't there any way we can actually change that to make them or force them into being adopted? Because we end up with these roads as councillors, and then the people come to us and say, this ain't fixed, and we go, it don't belong to us. They don't believe us. So how can we, or how can you, make it so you can enforce that, so if they go into the adoptable stage at level, they have to carry it through? That's my question.
Thank you. I think it's a conversation we've had in the past as well, unfortunately. I'll get quite technical here. So within the Highways Act, there's a specific section called Section 38, which is how we enter into an agreement with developers to get roads adopted as public highway. That is optional. There is no mechanism within there to force developers to put their roads forward for adoption. However, we do also have, again, another section in the Highways Act, which is called the Advanced Payments Code, which basically means, and we've got a policy on this, that where it hits that parameter, so I think our parameter is anything over 10 dwellings and over 100 yards in length, which is most developments that are residential and significant, they have to build it to an acceptable standard. So that doesn't mean that at the end of it that it's adopted, but it means that what is delivered is of a high enough quality that it's not going to cause issues for the residents. What we do find is that where we serve that Advanced Payments Code notice, it almost acts as a little bit of a push to a developer because they're already going to have to enter an agreement with us and they're already going to have to pay a bond to us. It can just be a little bit of an incentive to put it forward for Section 38 because they realise they've already got to jump through a lot of the same hoops. But unfortunately, the basic answer is no, we can't force it. We continue to encourage it. Most of our developments get adopted, but where a developer chooses to keep it private, we have no mechanism to force them to do otherwise. Sorry.
Thank you. Councillor Vernon.
Thank you, Chairman. I absolutely support this document and think the concept of ensuring we have that joined up arrangement is great and that new developments have a certain standard that they need to adhere to. It's interesting what you've just mentioned about the Section 38 being optional because I'm actually sort of dealing with a parish at the moment who have this very issue where a development should have been adopted 20 years ago, hasn't been adopted because it didn't get up to the required standard and now they're in this sort of standoff situation, but that's a completely separate one. Something I wanted to ask about, and I may be completely wrong here, but my understanding was that with car parking, there was a national guidance on how many spaces would be provided per property, not according to sort of sizes of properties, but sort of, yeah, and so I'd welcome some clarification on that because when on page 172 you talk about sort of obviously the child-friendly space, designing out vehicle speeding, junction design, and all of that aspect of a development, surely one of the key issues which all of us experience at the moment is parking on pavements. So actually we almost need to start from the ground up and ensure that every property has its own amount of parking that is sufficient for that property. Do we have any influence on that at all? And then just my final point was about the point that you've made to do with development control at district council level. Are district council totally on board with this? Because they're going to be the ones that are offering developers pre-app advice and going sort of down that route. So as such, if we're much later to the process and they've already had the pre-app advice and haven't been advised of that, that would strike me as perhaps not being particularly worthwhile doing this. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Vernon. Yes, on car parking, that is one of the most integral things to street design. If we don't get the parking right, the rest of the space doesn't work 100%. There are lots of different guidance documents out there at a national, regional and local level. There isn't a national standard per se that is like a hard and fast, this has to deliver this. What is included in the district council's local plans, they will often have a policy on parking standards that sets out if a house is in this location and it's 3 bedrooms, it needs to have this many parking spaces. What we would like to do with this document is try and provide a little bit more context around car parking, options, where they should be used, the levels of car parking in relation to the actual location and the type of development, because obviously we can all recognise that a 4-bed house in a rural village needs a completely different amount of car parking to a 1-bed house in Lincoln, for example. So, you know, we need to be reflective of those differing needs. But, like I say, for this to hold any planning weight, and this ties into that second question, it needs to be adopted as a supplementary planning document by the district council. So their parking standards that are already in their local plan will be the overarching expectation, but we can continue to shape the context of that through this document. With regard to that second question in full, we work incredibly closely with the local planning authorities, and actually for the most part on major residential developments we do get involved in those pre-application discussions. If the LPAs were to buy in per se to this document, that would form part of those pre-application discussions as well. We have spoken to a couple of the district councils who seem incredibly keen to bring this forward. So as you'll have seen in the report, there's a requirement that each of the local planning authorities will bring forward their own design code anyway. This almost takes some of that work off them if they're able to just buy into this, which provides consistency across the entirety of the county. So I am hopeful that going forward they will adopt it, and then it holds as much weight for them as it does for us, if that makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ashton.
Thank you. First of all, just to make clear that in a parallel life to this one, I'm portfolio holder for planning on East Lincolnshire District Council. I genuinely welcome the approach, but I would genuinely encourage likewise that we make sure that each of the local planning authorities in Lincolnshire are fully on board with this and involved in that process every step of the way. It's a little bit concerning that you've only spoken to a couple of them so far. I would just genuinely, this has so much potential, but it needs to be a genuine partnership between the local planning authorities and ourselves as the Highways Authority. And the reason I say that is that there is often, and I am privileged to understand it from both sides, but there is often a misunderstanding on the part of one council or another council as to just where the powers lie, where the responsibilities lie, and also the requirement to make planning decisions that are robust enough to withstand either a planning inspector or a judicial review. So I'm just mindful that we make sure that the local planning authorities that will ultimately be the decision makers are shaping this from the very beginning and are on board with it and are included. I mean, I'd love a Lincolnshire partnership on this. I think it's a great idea, but please do make sure that everybody's on the same page at the earliest stage.
Thank you, Councillor Ashton. Yeah, I completely agree. We've been cautious about speaking to the local planning authorities before we had that decision as Lincolnshire County Council. Those initial discussions we've had have been very speculative rather than detailed, but yes, absolutely, we will be working incredibly closely with the LPAs to bring that forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Gibson.
Thank you, Chairman. My inbox in regard to this is normally filled with bin collection points are the bane of my life in my area. Everybody hates them, and as soon as they're emptied, there's a bag there straight away, and it causes infestations. I can see it might be mentioned in there, and I wonder if that's something we could look at outlawing. That'll be fantastic. Wheelie bin storage. I notice in other areas that they're actually building it into the households and the garage with storage. Councillor Tyrrell's not decided whether we're having wheelie bins yet, but maybe for the future that's something that could be considered. I think it does look a lot neater and tidier. And then I see there's a steering group. I'd like these two things to be in there if it's possible, or a mention of them, the bin collection points, and then the lighting. Our estates at the moment are obviously dark overnight. We need to find a way of getting some sort of lighting, and surely that's possible with solar. I know year round that's obviously not brilliant, but with the street furniture and everything else, maybe there's some new methods out there that we can look at, that we can ask our developers or put into this project so that we can get some lighting back into our estates as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gibson. Yeah, bin collection points are required at the end of private drives because refuse vehicles won't go into private drives to collect bins. One of the things that we intend to include within the content of this streets design code is more guidance on preventing the sheer number of private drives that we can sometimes see, because they're not always the best design. I'm not saying we outlaw private drives completely, but there will still be, we can reduce the number of those, which will reduce the number of bin collection points. There's a whole host of reasons why we would look to do that. Wheelie bin storage, absolutely agree as well, particularly on terraced houses. We need to be realistic about how people actually live in their spaces. If they've got to drag their wheelie bin 100 yards, they're not going to do it. They will just leave it on the front. So that is something that we try and push, and again, that will form part of the streets design code. And with regards to the street lighting, that will be part of the piece of work that we're doing, so we can feed back to you on that as it moves forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Brooks.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I support this approach. I think it's the right way to go, and so I'm totally in favour of that. Now, my question was on street lighting as well, because developers don't necessarily have to come up with a scheme these days that can be adopted by the county council, a street lighting scheme. They can opt to go their own way and look after the lights, probably through a management company or whatever. Will we be putting something in this with to give a standard, a minimum standard for street lighting, you know, that we would expect? Because it just concerns me that possibly now they can go their own way, and the county not necessarily be an adopted scheme by the county council, that the standards of lighting on these estates might start to diminish. And I think we need to be getting something in there to make sure that that doesn't happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brooks. My understanding is that, and I will follow up on this when I've absolutely got the facts, but my understanding is that before that change in policy came forward, where we were expecting all developments to be lit and that we would adopt them, that was done to the British standard. When we revised that policy, we took out that requirement, and following on from the types of comments that you've made there, we're now reviewing that again, and I think I will be expecting developers to, even if it's private lighting, to conform with that British standard. But I'll 100% check on that for you.
Thank you. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chairman. It relates actually to Councillor Vernon's question. I know we can't compel a developer to make something adoptable standard, but when, for example, I've got a small development in my division and the original developer has gone bust, and I've tried to find this out many times, Chairman, and how do residents who want to then make it an adoptable standard so that it's maintained by the county, how do they go about doing that? Because when I've tried to look this up for residents, when the developer's gone bust, it's virtually impossible to do, because you need the name of the company, you need how they constructed it, how they did. If a company's bust, you're not going to get their construction method because the company's bust. So can we please, either through this design code or through another policy, have a means where this can be done relatively easily whilst complying with what we need to comply with, so that if residents want to do that, and I appreciate there's a cost involved to them and to the council, but if they want to do that and want to work together, that it's actually a viable thing to do, because at the minute, Chairman, frankly it isn't, and we need to look at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's a conversation we can have offline. I'm not sure, like you say, the Streets Design Code is necessarily the mechanism, but yeah, I completely agree with the sentiment. Yes, we'll look into ways that we can strengthen that. Obviously, the reason we don't just ad hoc say, yes, we will adopt that, is because of that risk potentially to the authority. But yes, we can balance that and have that discussion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your questions and comments. This now concludes the discussion of this item. I move that the committee endorse the production of a Streets Design Code, and thank officers for the detailed contents and responses to questions provided, and I ask that comments, suggestions and recommendations be cascaded to the relevant officers for inclusion in a review of the Streets Design Code. Does anyone dissent? If so, please indicate now. No, thank you, that is agreed. Moving on to the next item, the report includes, since Anglian Water's previous appearances before the committee, it includes the background, data, actions and ongoing measures from Lincolnshire County Council's Streetworks and Permitting team. Actions required. It is asked that we review and comment on the contents of this report, and that we ask questions of Anglian Water regarding the report and make recommendations as fit. The report will be presented by Ashley Behan, Streetworks and Permitting Manager. Mandy Robinson, Network Regulation Compliance Manager, is here to support with questions. Also in attendance are our Anglian Water partner representatives, Kiati Pugh, Streetworks Manager, Anglian Water, Mark Keary, the IMR Contract Manager, Anglian Water, Clancy. So over to you, Ash. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Morning all. Nice introduction. Third time we've been here. there's nothing worse than driving around the county, getting stuck in roadworks, especially poorly managed roadworks. And with 71,000 sets of roadworks in Lincolnshire every year, it's a busy network, and we need to try to ensure people are moving as freely and as uninterruptedly as possible. We've taken our appearances here as of Anglian Water very seriously from the start. And when we first sat in here in April 23, I said that if Anglian Water didn't improve, we would do everything we could to maximise the fines and the penalties we could to drive them to improve. And largely, I'm pleased to say that we haven't really had to do that. And this report is presents lots of positive data around their improvement. So we're 15 months on since April 23. And I'd just set the scene by saying, I've mentioned Lincolnshire is busy with roadworks, as is the national picture. Anglian Water are Lincolnshire's largest works promoter, so around about 15,000 sets of works every year. And you know what they deliver in that, whether it's maintenance and repair or new connections and new services, is vital for the infrastructure and improvement of the county in Lincolnshire. So as the biggest works promoter, perhaps aside from ourselves as the county council, they're always going to be the most visible and have the greatest impact, and that's why it makes the improvement plan and the works that we've done through this committee vitally important. So since April 23, Anglian Water were the first utilities company to sign our Streetworks Charter. So the Lincolnshire Streetworks Charter is one of a collaborative effort that's one of its only kind in England, certainly in the East Midlands region. And I would say that Anglian Water have perhaps contributed the most of any organisation who have signed that so far. When we first sat in this committee, Anglian Water's performance, particularly around road closures, was a key feature. And when we looked into the data of that, they were completing around 52% of their road closures within 3 days. I'm pleased to be able to report that that's now 71%, so a significant improvement. We've increased the amount of inspections we're undertaking on Anglian Water to around about 45% of every live site, which is more than any other utility. And broadly, they've shown compliance with our inspections with an 89% pass rate. They have reduced their fixed penalty notices issued by 45%, and I know that was a key question that was raised previously when we were here in October. They've reduced their Section 74s, their overstays, so staying after their permit dates, by 75%. Through initiatives of the Streetworks Charter, they're now giving more information to members of the public, particularly around their immediate work, so an emergency or an urgent set of works where they undertake road works without informing us first. So when you're driving around the county and seeing some of those, you'll now see some urgent traffic management required for water repair, for example, just helping members of the public understand why that inconvenient situation is there. But we recognise there's still more work to do, and we are working very closely together to continue those improvements. We would like to see more collaboration, particularly around new development sites, which are typically the most impactful from roadworks because of the number of utilities that need to meet to work. Some of you may have seen a press release that we issued last week on perhaps one of our most successful collaborative works that we've done in Lincolnshire, where we've saved 105 days of further roadworks disruption through a partnership of Lincolnshire County Council, Cadent and City Fibre. Anglian Water are really on board with collaborative working, and we would like to understand how we can achieve more of those works. We'd like fewer road closures, but we do recognise that we have to keep highway users and the workforce safe when working on site. So we're working with really stringent legislation around road widths when we're considering road closures. But the number of Anglian Water's road closures has reduced. And in terms of the duration for their completion, around about 71% in 3 days. Between us, we think we can push that to 80% and above. So that's our next focus. So overall, this report is positive. I do appreciate that, as the largest works promoter, there is still a lot more works to do, and we're going to continue that through our Streetworks Charter meetings. The next one we've got is at the end of October. But I welcome questions on the report. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any speakers? Councillor Vernon.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you very much indeed for that report. I think, as you say, I would like to start with saying that the increase to 71% being completed within 3 days is brilliant. I've just got a couple of points from the report. Page 177, I may be being a bit sort of naive here, but I can't really understand why summer would present more challenges to them than winter in performance. And I wondered if you may be able to clarify why that was. And then on page 179, the on-site monitoring, I accept that there's a broad level of compliance, but given that we're actually only inspecting about 45% of all the works that are in progress at any time, and of that 45%, 11% are not compliant, I wonder if we were doing more inspections, how many more would not be compliant? Not to be negative, but to sort of ask the question. And then the sort of final point that I've just based on your presentation, I'm really pleased to hear that people are interested in doing more collaborative working, because that holds massive benefit to everybody who's utilising the roads. And I would expect as well that there would be significant cost savings to these companies that are carrying out the work. So I can't see why they wouldn't want to do that. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. If I get this wrong, I'll ask Carty and Mark to add to me. Summer and winter present challenges for Anglian Water because of the temperatures, so extreme temperatures in summer and winter. So both are a challenge. Summer is a problem as well. Resource levels drop over summer due to holidays. So that's one of the challenges. I don't know if you want to add to that, Mark.
Yeah, thank you. I think what we've seen over the last few years, certainly we're getting a lot mild winters, so actually it's the summer that's been impacting us more. We get more demand from our customers in the summer as well. And just to slightly correct you, Ash, we do increase our resource levels during the summer to cope with that demand and the winter, but it's mainly the climate that's affecting that. It used to be the opposite way round, really. The winters were hitting us harder, but the summers tend to hit us harder currently. Thanks.
Thank you, Mark. In terms of inspecting that 45%, we can't be everywhere, but we could be anywhere. We target our inspections to ensure we are inspecting the most sensitive of sites, the road closures, the traffic sensitive streets. So yeah, if we inspected more, we could probably find more failure, but I think that the level of inspection we're carrying out on Anglian Water's work at present is sufficient, and it does allow us to drive that improvement. In terms of collaborative working, we're really hopeful that we can find a mechanism to allow more utility companies to work collaboratively. It is a challenge because of the positions they need to be on streets. There are also construction design management, CDM regulations around collaborative working, which make it difficult. But you know, the example I shared clearly shows it can work and it has benefits. So yeah, I agree. We'll be looking for more of those opportunities.
Chairman, with your permission, if I could just come back, I just wanted to absolutely confirm that sort of with the obviously sort of 11% not being compliant out of the 45, I fully accept that there may be sort of much more compliant if you did a larger model. I'm not necessarily just suggesting that, so I just wanted to make that clear. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Tyrrell.
Thank you. A bit of your collaboration work is already said, but saying about it, as I do sewer connections, they're usually the deepest people. So being in collaboration with yourselves, and we've done it before where we put our pipe in, you've gone over the top of us, I really do think we ought to stretch that more and get more people involved in that, because we'd only shut the road off once. The other thing about shutting roads off, as I found, that all our roads are not wide enough. They're like 4 or 5 metres, but they still have a white line down the middle and the cars can get by. I find so many road closures where they're working just inside the road, but because they haven't got that 3.6, is it 3.6? I think it is 3.6, that they have to close the road off. So, and I just wondered if that's, sometimes you could look at it and think, you can get by with a bus. You know, and that's just that one. And there was one more, what I just put down. Oh, it does matter. Someone will probably ever mention it anyway. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a good point, and yeah, we definitely need to collaborate more and find those mechanisms to do that. In terms of the road closures, you're right. Lincolnshire's roads are rural; they're not overly wide. You might think you can get a car past a roadwork site, but the health and safety legislation around it, as you know from working in the industry, is really stringent. and if something should happen on that site, let's say if we got vehicles down, none of us would ever want to be in the position of trying to justify that if the health and safety executive, for example, were involved. The code of practice around those road widths is currently being rewritten, so a review of that will hopefully be out in the next 18 months. That might allow us to consider a more dynamic risk assessment approach to some rural locations, for example. But the reality is that the road widths in Lincolnshire and that current health and safety legislation does mean that for a lot of the types of works that Anglian Water are doing, both reactively and particularly on connections and disconnections, do lead to road closures, I'm afraid. So that's why it's really important how quickly can they complete the road closures and return the highway back to use.
Thank you. Councillor Ashton.
Thank you. I would genuinely welcome the progress that we've made on this. I think given where we started the discussions a year or 18 months ago, it really does seem that progress has been made. The only thing I would add, and I appreciate the argument that sometimes you have to close a road, there's no way around doing so, and even at relatively short notice. One thing I would encourage, if you're having to close roads, could you please be mindful of where you're giving notice that the road ahead is closed, given that many of the routes across the rural bits of Lincolnshire, by the time you've got to the point at which the road is closed, you're having to take a much further detour than if you had noticed that the road was closed much earlier on. You could change your route accordingly rather than getting up and I can't for the life of me. I have driven somewhere in the last 14 days, and I remember coming up to the closure and it having been past every opportunity to have turned off. And I can't for the life remember where it was. But by the time we get to the end of the meeting, I hope I can do, and I'll tell you where it was. But thank you.
Yeah, I think there's nothing worse when you see a road ahead closed sign in a rural area or on a main road, and you're thinking, okay, the road ahead is closed. Well, where is it closed? Can I access my village? Can I get to my town? Can I get 3 miles, 5 miles, 1 mile? Or do I need to take the diversion? Don't I? And it is something we actually discussed at our last Streetworks Charter meetings around what extra information could we give at those road ahead closed signs. So something we'd like to take away, and we're currently talking as a group about, is can we put an information sign next to a road ahead closed that says access to Leadenham, for example, or access for 3.5 miles. So it just gives people more information. Of course, the challenge with diversion routes and that decision making is that wherever possible, we're trying to choose like-for-like roads or suitable roads as a diversion. So that can sometimes lead to a diversion being signed on a longer route than perhaps a route that residents and local people will know. But yeah, fully accept that there's nothing worse than driving miles and not understanding where the road is closed, and we are intending to do something about it.
Councillor Ashton.
Yeah, just come back. Yeah, really would welcome that. And I think it's about making, to my mind, it's about making sure that perfect isn't the enemy of the good here. Because anybody that's ever tried to follow a set of diversion sign, good luck. I'd say if you could just put that information at the beginning and allow people that are using those roads, who usually have a degree of knowledge of the local area for the most part, and if they don't, they've got a satellite navigation. But if they've got the information, they can take the decision on the next most appropriate road and route around. That would be brilliant if you could do that.
Yeah, absolutely. We will, hopefully you'll see that on site soon.
Thank you. Councillor Brooks.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to say that I am pleased with the improvements, pleased with the report, and pleased with the improvements that are being reported. I mean, you can see it when you're driving round that the problems that we've had with Anglian Water previously are not so prolific, and so it's really pleasing to see that. I think there is still room for improvement with the removal of the signs when they're no longer needed. Sometimes, you know, I would say probably between a job being completed and then some reinstatement that needs doing, but the signs could be dropped in the meantime to allow traffic through. So that, so yes, it's pleasing to see the improvements. And I would just finish off say there must be improvements, because my spotter, the chap that always, cyclist that always contacted me over several years, and I used to pass the comments, the problems on to Ashley, unless he's contacting Ashley direct now. He hasn't contacted me this summer at all, touch wood. So, you know, I think that is a proof as well that there's improvements have happened. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, I will just say to Councillor Brooks, yeah, there are still improvements to do around those rural road closures and removing signs when they're not needed. In terms of your Anglian water spotter, probably the number one feedback we get is from the gentleman in your constituency. He does contact me directly, and he provides some useful information and context, but what I would say is he doesn't contact me as much as he once did, so things are heading in the right direction.
Thank you. Councillor Tyrrell.
Sorry, I did find it. What it was is, in my area, you've closed the road off twice on a Friday when it's market day, and it caused so much trouble, and they did it twice. And I just wondered why they couldn't have spoke to the parish council, because you let the water run for 2 days before it even came. So it was kind of like a bit of a dig at me when that happened. That was one question. The other thing is, just going back on the actual road closure and joining it together, is you would only have one road closure licence. So if Anglia Water picked it up, or the customer would save money, everybody would save money. I think it would be a decent thing to do. Thank you.
Yeah, you make a good point. I mean, in terms of market days, most of our the areas around our markets in Lincolnshire are flagged as traffic sensitive streets because of those market days. So really when anybody is planning works, we should plan to avoid them unless it's an absolute emergency and a utility has to go in very, very quickly. The government at the moment is consulting on digital traffic regulation orders, which will include temporaries. So we hope when that system gets in place, there'll be more awareness of where people have a TTRO in place. But you're right, yeah, more cost effective for everybody, and it has to be a better place. I agree.
Thank you. Councillor Strangle.
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, yes, I agree with Councillor Ashton. I remember sitting in the committee when the Streets Works Charter was implemented along with Anglian Water, and it seems to be working quite well, I think, anyway. To bring up Councillor Brooks's point about the removal of signs, I'd like to ask, is it the responsibility of the person or unit or even company to remove its own signs, or can others do it for them? It seems strange that these diversion signs, there's one that is on Tritton Road actually, near where the crossroads is at Scullingthorpe Road. It's been there quite a while, which says diversion. Of course there is no diversion anywhere. So is there collaboration in the sense that highways could pick up Anglian Water signs and vice versa, or does it have to be whoever the person or unit that actually put them there has to come back and get it when it's no longer viable? Thank you, Chairman.
So the works promoter, the organisation carrying out the works, are responsible for the removal of those signs. There are significant penalties in place for companies, utility companies, that don't remove those signs. So it's within their interest to do that. We'll take a look at the diversion sign that's left down there and get it removed. If we're unable to get them removed, we can remove them, and we have removed them in the past, and we will do that. But it's within the interest of that works promoter to remove them at the completion of their works.
Okay, Mark Carey, thank you.
Yeah, just on your point on that, we quite often get signs reported in as our signs, and we will go out and pick those up and then kind of discuss the whys and wherefores and responsibilities after. Yeah, we're quite often proactive like that.
Thank you. Is there any further speaker? Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chair. As a general question about working together, there was a water box that was sunken in the road, one of the roads in my division. It was reported on Fix My Street, got told not the council's responsibility, so I take it that that report was then passed on. It was raised at least twice by highways officers, and I believe there's some sort of order that goes on for the contractor to carry out that work. Now, what I want to know is, when the section, whatever it is put on the contractor to carry out the work, is there a period that the work has to be, carried out in? Because the sunken water box was right outside one of the biggest primary schools in Lincolnshire, and it didn't seem that no one was taking any responsibility for it, and it was totally embarrassing when they kept saying it was the county council, that, this is a residents, was saying it was the county council's fault, and I'll say it's nothing to do with them, it's the water board.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Clark. You're talking about Bristol Drive, aren't you? Yeah. Section 81 of the New Roads and Street Works Act allows us as the Highway Authority to notify an asset owner, so Anglian Water in this case, that their apparatus in the street is defective. There is an awful lot of manhole covers and cabinets scattered around the county that different utility companies own. There is always going to be times where we receive a report from a member of the public and we issue a Section 81 to let's say, Anglian Water, and we don't agree between the Highway Authority and Anglian Water of who is responsible for that. As you'll probably know, I'm pleased to say that Bristol Drive has been completed. So Bristol Drive was a sort of a contentious discussion between us and Anglian Water. So was it the apparatus that's failing, or was it the carriageway that has sunk? Because Section 81 relates to apparatus which a utility has to repair, whereas anything surrounding the apparatus is our responsibility as the Highway Authority. But I'm pleased to say it did take a long time, but as a result of our discussions, Anglian Water did agree we were right and eventually fixed it. So in terms of Section 81, there is actually no time frame in which a utility has to complete a non-dangerous Section 81. However, we are continually having discussions about those, and Carty was on a meeting with me a couple of weeks ago around how we could improve those responses. So there is no time frame. I think the communication we send back to residents on maybe through a Fix My Street report could be better, it could be clearer, and that's something we need to take away and improve. But I'm pleased that one got done, and I apologise that it took so long.
Okay. Thank you for your questions and comments. This now concludes the discussion of this item. I move that the committee endorse the report and that our satisfaction be recorded in relation to the detailed information and assurances provided, and that our recommendations and suggestions in relation to partnership working as captured be cascaded across the relevant leading officers and partner teams. And I ask that all comments and suggestions raised by this committee be shared with the executive member for their information. Does anyone dissent? If so, please indicate now. Seeing none, thank you, that is agreed. Before we move on with any further agenda business, we'll just take a short break and resume this session at 11:35. Thank you. Thank you very much, everybody. If you can settle down, that would be marvellous. And we'll resume with the agenda. So, Highways Performance Report Quarter 1. The next scrutiny report is on pages 185 to 356 and sets out the performance of the highway service, including the Highways Maintenance Schemes Update, Lincolnshire Highways Performance Report and Highways Complaints Report. In terms of our actions, it is asked that we consider and comment on the detail contained in the report and recommend any actions to the Executive Member for Highways, Transport and IT. The report will be presented by Jonathan Evans, Head of Highways, Client and Contractual Management Services. So over to you, Jonathan.
Thank you, Chairman. So this report provides an update on all aspects of the highway service delivery, including the quarterly performance data for the key contracts, highway works, traffic signals and professional services, and strategic highlights relevant to the highway maintenance service in Lincolnshire. I'll jump straight into the performance report, the actual figures. For highway works term contract, which is operated by Balfour Beatty, we scored 68.5 this quarter. That was down from the previous quarter. Professional services contract, operated by WSP, scored 81.1 out of 100 again. That was up from the previous quarter. Traffic signals term contract, which is operated by Colas, scored 93 out of 100, and that's up again from 86 last quarter. And as a client measure, the team that we score ourselves as an equal partner, we scored 83, which is static from the previous quarter. The overarching performance indicators, which is our key performance indicators, we scored 83, which is up 1 point from last quarter. In line with the contractual procedures, perform PI3 for the reactive works, PI4, task completed within timescale, and PI6, quality assessment of workmanship, and PI9, drainage cleansing of the highway works contract, have fallen below the minimum performance level. PI3 has triggered a low service damage, and performance improvement plans are in place for PI4 and PI9. So I'll move now on to specific updates for each of the contracts, and I'll start with highway works, which is Balfour Beatty, and I'll jump straight into the challenges and improvements. So the combined capital and reactive budget for the highway maintenance service for 24-25 is approximately 109 million. The additional LCC funding announced over the past 9 months has ensured that the existing service levels can be maintained for the current financial year. The funding pots detailed on pages 187 and 188 of the report. In addition to this, we had some really positive news out on Friday that was announced at full council that the highway service has been allocated an additional 7 million, which is fantastic for the service that we deliver. Based on this level of funding, it's anticipated that the Highways Infrastructure Asset Management Strategy objectives to hold our key assets in a steady state whilst implementing an accelerated improvement on the unclassified road network will be achieved. Funding beyond April 2025 is less certain following the change in government while spending priorities emerge. The service anticipates that the funding picture will become clearer following the autumn statement, and during that time the service will continue to highlight our officer concerns to the Department of Transport. During quarter 1, the reactive service, which is performance indicator 3, recovered from the high volume of work over the winter season following the impact of the storms. The number of live jobs at the start of the quarter was 4,694, which by the end of the quarter had reduced to 3,261. Yesterday, this figure is now 2,347, so it shows that sort of recovery phase following a challenging winter period. For performance indicator 9, we've got new drainage resource have been brought onto the contract this year via the supply chain partner Flowline, who work underneath Balfour Beatty, due to the additional budget allocation that we've been given. Attention has been focused on mobilising the resources, and as a consequence of the drainage cleansing programme has fallen behind, so that's why that performance indicator has dipped slightly. They're the gangs that are doing the normal cyclic operation. Flowline have put in place an action plan to catch up, and Balfour Beatty will be monitoring this closely. I'll move now on to the professional services contract, which is operated by WSP, and again jump straight into the challenges and improvements. The pipeline of work for the highway service remains high and aligns with the funding levels allocated to the highway service. The contractual top-up via the professional services contract enables LCC to reach back into the wider WSP. To facilitate delivery of the additional funding pots, WSP officers normally working within the North Yorkshire contract have commenced a programme of design for patching and surfacing schemes due to commence in January 2025. And that's sort of a widened scope that is helping us out with some of the highway maintenance activity. Move now on to the traffic service, traffic signals term contract, which is operated by Colas. Again, jumping into the challenges and improvements. So service delivery performance scoring is in a good place. The team, however, are very busy with some of the following works. So we've got a capital refurbishment programme in place, which is currently 7 schemes. There's the Grantham Town Centre funded works at Harloxton Road, Westgate and Station Approach have all commenced. We've got the Western Growth Corridor, which was referred to earlier. We've got a programme of halogen lamp conversion to LED schemes with 5 junctions and 5 crossings identified for the remainder of this financial year. An upgrade to Branston Crossroads, which is adaptive control from February, and also a number of new crossings announced as part of the Councillor Crossing Initiative. So that's all really positive, and there's a lot of activity in that area. Something that's worth highlighting within the report, the requirement to keep our assets working to a 25-year lifespan is resulting in some obsolete sites becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. We're seeing an increase in sites where the poles are failing in advance of the projected site in the anticipated 25-year cycle. We've got an asset management implementation group that are focused on this, and we're just looking at the business case of potentially bringing that cycle forward slightly to counteract the problem and issues that we're seeing with the age of the columns. Move now on to complaints. A copy of the complaints Q1 report can be found in Appendix C. During Q1, the Highway Service received a total of 12,017 inquiries, with 9,412 of them being Fix My Street inquiries and 2,650 calls. The Customer Relations team received a total of 133 contacts with Q1 of 24-25, and that just shows the relative to the volume of inquiries that we're receiving. So the 133 contacts equate to approximately 1.1% of all contacts made. The number of complaints entering the formal process has increased by 19% in comparison to the previous quarter, and a decrease of 9% in comparison to the same quarter of the previous year. The top 3 complaint areas are potholes, flooding and drainage, and scheduled maintenance. Move now on to a new item that we've added, which catches all the work that we did in the previous year. So I've titled that Highway Service Added Value. So the scale of activity completed in the Highway Service is often reported in terms of work activity completed in the year in terms of work done, and that is our primary purpose. Whilst this is a key focus, the service, in collaboration with our key partners, Balfour Beatty Coles and WSP, were able to deliver additional value to Lincolnshire and its residents. Between the 1st of April 23 to the 31st of March 24, the partners have delivered approximately 26.1 million of social value when measured using the National TOMS framework. The measure converts service activity using an accredited approach and converts it into a financial figure so that it can be valued and benchmarked going forward. In addition to that, over the past year, the service has actively engaged with LCC Care Leaver programme and have successfully engaged 3 Care Leaver placements, 2 of which have since converted into permanent appointments, which is really good news. And again, in addition to that, we've had increasing number of apprentices appointed by the partners. The partners are now exceeding their original bid targets, and is demonstrating the commitment to addressing the concerns in relation to skills shortage problem. And again, just to show and demonstrate some of the wider value that we're adding, LCC Highway Service has implemented a programme that enables inexperienced officers to attend college whilst being placed within a teams on a 3-month rota, with the hope that they later progress with the service to be our leaders of the future. The service has created and appointed 2 officers into this programme that started in August 2024. Move now on to the final bit, the conclusion. So Lincolnshire's Highway team and strategic partners continue to deliver an efficient and effective service whilst being agile enough to deliver additional works from the increased funds. Performance reported in Q1 shows a drop in 1 of the 5 reporting areas, with the remaining 4 either improving or remaining static. The areas of low performance are being investigated and are showing signs of recovery as we move into Q2. The service continues to pursue further initiatives to tackle areas of low performance and is consistently striving to implement value for money savings across the wider service. The committee is asked to consider and comment on the detail contained within the report and recommend any changes or actions to the Executive Member for Highways, Transport and IT. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any speakers? Councillor Vernon.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for your report. I may have read this ever so slightly differently to how it should have been read, so huge apologies, but I had read on page 353 that the majority of failing was through quality of service and communication, and that the communication was down to Fix My Street, which we'd obviously talked about quite a lot. And I seem to recall that we were going to, the council was going to be having a look at Fix My Street and whether there was the ability to add in sort of more appropriate messages for times in heavy need. and the sort of standard messages that we could put in during storm periods and whatnot, so that people don't just see sort of, yep, we've logged your query, sort of speak in 7 days. I see from the forward plan that we're looking at Fix My Street as a committee in December. Will we be sort of given the opportunity to look at those sort of things when we're doing that? And then I'll just mention my other point, which is the point regarding the apprentices and care leavers that you've mentioned and the leaders of the future. I think that's absolutely fantastic. And I think, yeah, brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Vernon. Yeah, thank you for those comments along the apprentices. It's taken a bit of effort to get it up and running, but it feels like we're in a really good place with the partners now, and we're doing some good things wider than our normal day-to-day service delivery. In terms of Fix My Street, I think probably since the last conversation, this is a sort of a lag of complaints that have come through the system following Storm Henk and Babbitt. The systems, the changes that we've already made to Fix My Street that shifts the initial response to our normal business as usual service has already happened, but we're going to bring that to the Highways and Transportation Scrutiny Committee in December to talk around that in more detail. So there'll still be an opportunity to look at that in more detail. We'll explain what we've done to date and also describe some of the packages of work that we're doing, wider improvements on Fix My Street. So I think there's lots of opportunity to focus on that. And I think, again, sometimes the reference made within the complaints report is that Fix My Street is at fault. It's probably the text and the narrative that's automating off the back of our works. And sometimes schedule maintenance, there could just be a pause or a delay. And sometimes the Fix My Street software package gets the blame when it's probably a process and probably a greater level of detail that needs to go into that, of how we interact and deal with our members of the public.
Okay, thank you. And thanks everyone for your questions and comments. This now concludes the discussion of this item. I move that the committee endorse this report and our satisfaction be recorded in relation to progress updates and assurances provided, and ask that comments raised by this committee be shared with the leading officers and executive member for their information. Does anyone dissent? If so, please indicate now. No, thank you, that is agreed. So moving on to the next item of the agenda, the Transport Quarter 1 Performance Report 2024-25. The report is on pages 357 to 356 of the agenda pack and provides us with a summary of performance for Quarter 1 in relation to the Council's transport services, including local bus services and educational travel. In terms of our actions, it is asked that we consider and comment on the detail contained in the report and recommend any actions to the Executive Member for Highways, Transport and IT. The report will be presented by Mike Reid, Head of Transport, and Helen Reek, Support Services Manager, may also attend for support. So over to you, Mike.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, everyone. So the quarterly report just provides an update on our recent priorities. There are three main areas that are focused on in the report. The first of these is the local bus services. This is where we've been working closely with our operating partners to provide better services locally through enhanced routes, extra routes and more frequencies for services. And I'm sure members have seen a lot recently in terms of the extra services that we've been providing. So we're hopeful that these are successful and they do actually promote more usage of the bus network, because the outcome is that we want essentially more passengers to use the service and for those services to then grow and develop, which helps the operator and helps ourselves and ultimately opens up more channels and more locations for residents and the public to visit. So there's quite a few listed there, half a dozen or so, which I'm sure will grow, but it is all dependent on the funding which will be available. And just mirroring my colleague from Highways, the uncertainty there is with the new government, I think if we can continue to lobby DfT for continued BSIP funding, then I'm sure that we can grow this network and further enhance what we've got. So there are these extra services in terms of local bus. We're also doing lots of work in terms of actual infrastructure. We've got the real-time information project, which is it's going through a testing phase, but it's due to develop in the next few months and start operating from I believe it's the hospital in October, which will be then developed even further, but we will be learning throughout the whole development phase of that as to how we can further improve it and enhance it. And also, I just wanted to touch on the BSIP funding is enabling us to develop our infrastructure in terms of bus shelters, bus stops, which we can hopefully provide more information to locals, particularly in the rural outland, and provide better kind of locations for residents to go and wait for buses. So if we can put in bus shelters, then that's something which could be preferable in some locations. And we accept that it's not always preferable for all locations, but we are working closely with parish councils and members to see what we can actually bring forward with that actual spend, which we're helping to deliver with our highways colleagues. Second item, the main kind of priority that we're kind of just reporting on here is the educational travel issue. I'm sure everybody's aware that this is a major concern, not just locally but nationally, in terms of financial risk to all authorities. It has been identified as the biggest financial risk to LCC, in that the spend has been increasing significantly in the last 10 years, and it's something which has led us to really focus on educational travel, and in particular some of the issues around SEND cases and actual operator prices. So we've got a really good, robust programme of works now. We've got a transformation project board and project team which is helping to deliver some improvements, some changes. There's a lot to do in terms of the data and performance management, but we're operationally looking at, we have been reviewing the contracts and creating more route optimisation where we can reduce the vehicles travelled and loan occupancy kind of journeys for passengers. And I think it's something that it's an interesting piece of work. We do transport around 19,000 passengers per day. We don't have many complaints around that, which is always good. It's always reassuring, but there is a value. So there is a balance to be gained between providing an excellent service, but then trying to keep a cost on that, keep a lid on that cost. So it's a difficult balancing act, but we do it within the kind of statutory framework that we have to abide by. Thirdly, on the report, an item I was just going to raise is the key performance indicators, which we are developing. There's a lot of performance analysis which has been led by the educational travel kind of requirement, but in future, I'm hoping from Q2 we can come and start reporting on 3 main KPIs which are around this kind of single occupancy uptake, the speed of eligibility for actually approving cases, and also the percentage of applications agreed. So the details in the report, I think it's something that will help us to be more transparent, and it will open up some kind of debate about what we do as a service and how we best serve the public. Finally, just I did mention complaints. We do have, I think, relatively small amount of complaints considering the size of the service. As I've stated, we do transport around 19,000 passengers a day successfully. We have very few issues with that, but there's an acceptance that sometimes something does change for individual cases, which we're always happy to address. We do that as quickly and as informally as we can. However, sometimes things do escalate, and we have to go through a formal kind of complaints procedure. But in terms of numbers, in Q1 we had 23 contacts, which is a slight reduction from the previous quarter, probably due to the kind of time of year, but we are expecting an increase in those kind of statistics as we've come into this new kind of educational year. But overall, I think we're confident that we handle the cases in a kind of professional, robust manner to help us deal with parents and provide as much information as possible. But we do accept that things are not always perfect. But in terms of cases, proportionally, it's relatively good, but obviously we'd like it to be absolutely perfect. So it's something we do always strive to make that as smooth and efficient as possible, so that ideally we don't have any complaints, but I don't know if that's ever realistic. So the details of the report are there. Just kind of asking essentially if there's any questions for members to raise and approve the report. I'm sure there are some questions, but happy to take that on board if I hand it back, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Tyrrell. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Mike. Just a quick question. The bus shelters, I've done work on several bus shelters in Long Sutton, Lytton and all over. Sometimes it's been for the parish council, sometimes it's been for district council. Who actually owns the bus shelters, and who pays for the upkeep of them? I know they've paid for it in the past, but who is the actual person who actually does pay for it? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tyrrell. It is a mix, actually. I think district councils do own some. We own, I think, the majority, but it's something that we do accept that district councils have real financial difficulties, and it's probably proportionally it's more difficult for districts to maintain the bus shelters up to a certain standard. So it's something that we are very conscious of, and we have been talking to some districts about taking on those responsibilities. At the moment, for example, we're talking to the City Council about taking on the liability of their bus shelters, which will enable us to provide hopefully a better shelter for the residents, which is more in keeping with the standard that we've got around the rest of the county, and it's more consistent with the messaging that we need to get out to the public, so it gives a better overall service. So the bottom line is that there is a mix, but we will talk to the districts where we get an approach to see if we can use the BSIP funding to improve, possibly take over ourselves. It's something that we work collaboratively to essentially provide the best service for the public, and sometimes I think it's easy to get into the mindset of, oh, this is LTC spend or this is district council spend. In this area, I think it's good that we're collaborating, and yeah, we will actively seek to kind of discuss any improvements or any handovers, because we recognise that it's difficult for districts. Okay.
Thank you. Councillor Ashton.
Thank you very much, and I genuinely welcome the majority of the report. But it'd be remiss of me to let the local bus services element go without picking up on what plans have we got to restore or help restore the bus service to Anton Gout in my division. This being a medium-sized settlement that has been cut off from the bus network for most of the week since the operator deemed that route to be unsuitable for buses, given that everybody else's buses is perfectly capable of using those roads, and there aren't piles of cars from my residents at the side of the road having failed to make the journey. We have in Anton Gout and in Langrick and in Gypsy Bridge, we now have bus shelters that are in completely the wrong place for the remaining service. And I hear we're talking about making these improvements. One very straightforward improvement would be to have that bus using the route that it used for literally decades, and the bus shelters that have been provided by this authority and the parish councils, rather than having to go to the expense of moving them or building new ones.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Councillor Ashton. Can I just hand over to my colleague, the Network Design Manager, Stuart Eccles, see if he's got further information. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Councillor Ashton. I'm aware of the situation that you mentioned. I think there's some work to do with Bry Lane on that service, because that was a commercial decision that they took to reroute it. And I think I'd welcome a conversation with yourself outside of this to see what work we can do, because I appreciate that the communities that you mentioned there are disaffected. I appreciate that the peak services remain, so those who need to travel in either direction for work is still there. Outside of that, there is access through the Call Connect service, again appreciating that is a different service from what they were used to. So if we can, happy to pick up a conversation about how we can look at that corridor and what work needs to get done. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. Lately, the bus service has much improved in and around Lincoln, but the only problem is overcrowding. Now, you can go on a bus in the morning, single decker, it'll be overcrowded. A week later, it will still be a single decker overcrowded. Does the companies actually look upon this, like, shall we put a double decker on there, or shall we put an extra bus on because of the capacity? And also, what do the officers think will happen once the £2 a journey stops? Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ashley. Oh, sorry, carry on. Sorry.
I'll start to answer the question from Councillor Clark and then possibly hand over to my colleague Stuart again. In terms of overcrowding, I think it's an issue that it's not ideal, and it's not in the operator's interest to have a full bus and potentially be turning people away. So I think it may be on a case-by-case basis that there is a shortage of certain stock of vehicles that can actually operate at that period of time. It's something we are happy to speak to Stagecoach or PhD coaches about, see what their thoughts are, because they do have good data. But I think it may be something as simple as that. But ideally, they want to be ferrying around full buses, which maximises the efficiency of the service. But again, it's without knowing the detail, I think it's something that we can't really discuss. But we'll investigate that, and if we have a discussion after this, then happily kind of take that up. Do you want to just take up the issue of answer the question of the £2?
Yeah, thank you. So at the minute, I think the £2 fare cap is still up for discussion. I don't think any decisions have been made as to whether or not it will cease in December. I think it's hard to take a viewpoint at the minute. The £2 fare cap has been very successful across the country. I think it's been most successful in rural places like Lincolnshire, where you've got really long routes. So a £2 fare cap from, say, Lincoln to Skegness has a huge financial impact on residents. In the cities and towns, though, the impact has probably been less felt because the journeys are much shorter and the average fares tend to be less than the fare cap. So it's hard to give a broad view as to what could happen, but we are working closely with the Department of Transport to understand what the long-term future would look like, and equally with operators to what impact that will have. So as and when we get further clarity from the department, we can assess with our colleagues and understand what the issues would be.
Thank you. Councillor Ashley Morris.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I mean, this is really sort of a wee bit Groundhog Day. We seem to discuss this over and over. But with regard to the item brought up by Councillor Ashton, I'm on the parish council in that local area, which covers the area where the buses suddenly disappeared. We were just told that's been done. There was none of these buzzwords that we hear so much discussion, consultation, absolutely nothing. And the parish council was simply told, oh, well, we've done that. And I realised Bry Lane possibly, on the most easy to deal with, certainly from the point of view of trying to stop the buses belting through the middle of Boston when the market's on. I know that was an endless discussion with them, but I mean, this was done with no consultation at all. I mean, the parish council's reasonably sort of efficient and active in that area, and that would just have seemed sense. And perhaps then we could have suggested perhaps they used a smaller bus or made people very well aware of Call Connect. My business, which is on the 1192, which is the sort of just outside Langrick, I recommend Call Connect to customers to get to the museum, the campsite. I'm either told, oh, well, we asked and they said we don't stop for businesses, which seems insane. And it seems to be very patchy. Now, perhaps that's just my personal experience in that area, but I mean, I recommend it wholeheartedly. I say people, you can go all the way to Lincoln, it's brilliant. you know, and 10 people on the campsite, you can all get, it's massively cheap, miles cheaper than a taxi, and it sort of falls short. And it seems to me that that could actually plug some of the gaps that we're talking about. Totally pointless running a double-decker bus when you've got 2 people on it who are paying a low fare. I fully appreciate that these firms are commercial firms, exactly the same. I run a business. I don't tend to do things as a loss leader. But surely there can be a bit more, at least consultation. But as I say, Parish Council heard absolutely nothing. And I know there are issues with some of the school taxi systems in that area. Things have been reassessed. Well, that's a bit tricky too, because we have no footpaths at all. Kids actually can't walk from A to B, or don't seem to be able to. And the whole thing seems to have really upset a massive amount of people for no reason. I'd probably find, you know, there isn't an answer to that, but perhaps take those comments on board, particularly with a view to consultation, if something like that's going to happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll just answer the question on consultation. When a commercial service comes up for change, the operator has to register that with the Traffic Commissioner. And as part of that consultation process, they'll engage with ourselves as the local transport authority. When that is enacted, the responsibility lies for ourselves to then have that discussion and understand the impact and how that will affect residents. I think in previous conversations I had with Councillor Ashton, we were quite late in getting that communication, and therefore that consultation and notification wasn't undertaken with the parish. So apologies that that was the case in that situation. If, like in the instance that's described here, they are making that change and that decision to the route, as the LTA we have limited ability to help and navigate through that, because where that service runs consistently through the day, if they are changing that route, and like you say, there's a low amount of people travelling, it's how do you plug that gap? And it's not necessarily the easiest thing to do, because you'll appreciate the resource maybe that's required could be quite significant in terms of cost to do that. So it's not the easiest thing to do when commercial routes change, but I think if we get better notification up front, we can have that discussion, understand the impact, and find a way through it in a better way.
Thank you. Councillor Ashton.
Yes, I think it's probably just worthwhile putting on record for clarity there that as a local member, I wasn't aware of that incident until it was coming up on Facebook that the cat route had been cancelled. So I really do hope that no other members of this council has the same experience, that they are finding out literally last that a significant local service has changed in a way that is particularly damaging to their local residents, irrespective of whether it is a commercial decision or not. Having that information early gives us at least the opportunity to do something about it before it's too late.
Okay, thank you. Do you have any further speakers? Seeing none. Okay, well, thank you for the questions and comments. This now concludes the discussion of this item. I move that the committee endorse this report and that our satisfaction be recorded in relation to progress updates and assurances provided. I ask that comments raised by this committee be shared with leading officers and the executive member for their information. Does anyone dissent? If so, please indicate now. Thank you. That is agreed. The final item on the agenda is the committee work programme. This item is on pages 363 to 368 of the agenda pack. This item enables the committee to comment on the content of its work programme. The report will be presented by Chiara as scrutiny officer, and in terms of our actions is to review the work programme and highlight any additional scrutiny activity which could be included for consideration in the work programme. So over to you, Chiara.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm pleased to report that there's not been any changes onto the work programme since the publication of this report and agenda pack. I am in the process of developing the work programme for the next year, 2025. Therefore, I do welcome any contributions from members of the committee and also from officers in terms of items that you would like to see included in the work programme in the next year, and also items that officers are aware will be considered in the next few months or weeks in terms of either pre-decision scrutiny or performance scrutiny. So thank you very much. This concludes my update to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any speakers? Seeing none, thank you. So I move that we note the report and approve the existing work programme as detailed in pages 363 to 368. Does anyone dissent? If so, please indicate now. Seeing no one, thank you. That is agreed. That now concludes the business of the meeting. Thank you everyone for your attendance. Thank you.